Damage health is one of 3 non-elemental spell effects that cause direct health damage to your enemy. The other 2 being Drain Health and Absorb Health. In comparison to Drain Health, it's twice as expensive, but the health loss is permanent. However, even disregarding Drain, there are cheaper ways to cause damage with Destruction. A 100 point magnitude of damage health on touch costs 80 magicka, while 100 points of frost damage on touch only costs 50. The only element that costs more than damage health is poison, and that would be 90 magicka for the same magnitude of spell. Unfortunately, it gets worse. Absorb health costs the exact same amount of magicka, but as we know, absorb health is actually damage plus restore health, one on self and the other one on your enemy. So you are giving the same amount of magicka but only getting half of what absorb does. The wiki suggests using damage health because some enemies have elemental resistances. But damage health is actually itself resisted by enemies that have resist magicka, such as Breton and Orc NPCs. Also, in case you didn't know, resist magicka doesn't help against elemental damage in Morrowind. So, Bretons and Orcs would still be fully affected by, for example, fire damage, which is already much cheaper. Admittedly, damage health is going to be more effective against enemies that have weakness to magicka. So it might be a good idea to use it against Altmer. But unfortunately, Altmer also have weakness to fire. It's actually the exact same percentage. Honestly, if you're looking for cost effectiveness, you should just use fire and frost. Fire against enemies that are resistant to frost, and frost against enemies resistant to fire, and whatever you like better against the others. But if you just like using damage health for some reason, I'm not gonna judge you. I'm far from being an efficient player myself. I prefer gear that looks good to me instead of gear with superior stats, and I sometimes even use poison, which is actually even more expensive. Oh, but one time that damage health might be a genuine advantage is if you have a lot of resist magic effects and you go to Solstheim, where there's tons of enemies that have reflect, so that when you inevitably get hit by your own attack, it doesn't do much to you. Except we hit into a small snag here, and that's that in the vanilla version, absorbed health can't be reflected. Well, sort of, but effectively it works out like that. But if you have a version of the game where that's fixed, you might consider damage health better, purely for the reason that you can't accidentally heal your enemy. In Oblivion, damage health is both better and worse. Better because absorb health works only on touch, and it's also significantly more expensive. But worse because drain health is like stupidly cheap in that game. Just look at these costs. Damage health 100 points on touch, 170 magicka. Compared to that, absorb health 100 points on touch is 464 magicka. Wow. And drain health 100 points on touch, only 12 magicka. 12! That's with 84 in destruction, by the way. The actual costs varies depending on your destruction level, but you should get the idea. But elemental damage is still cheaper than damage health, by quite a decent amount. Although not as absurd as the cost differences that we just saw. Shock, which is the most expensive of the elements, costs 111 magicka, again for 100 shock damage on touch. However, in Oblivion, resist magicka also resists damage from elemental spells. So you are getting the exact same result whether you use a fire or damage health spell on a Breton, for example. So in Oblivion it would actually make sense to use damage health as your general attack spell if you just don't want to deal with figuring out enemy elemental resistances, provided you are willing to pay a higher magicka cost. Because if they actually fully resist a damage health spell, then they are also just immune to magicka overall, and you should probably use a weapon instead. Damage health is also available as a poison. There are a lot of alchemy ingredients with this effect, so it's fairly easily available. And from what I understand, poison damage is not resisted by Resist Magicka. However, 2 races have a resistance to poison specifically. Damage health does not exist in Skyrim as a spell at all, which is honestly kind of a shame because it means that Skyrim's destruction is just fire, frost and shock, which is honestly kinda boring. I mean, admittedly, I did just go on about how it's the least effective damage spell, but more variety is good. But like in Oblivion, it also exists in poison form, and like in Oblivion, there are 2 races that have resist poison, although the exact magnitudes are smaller than they used to be. Now, if you want to know how unexpectedly good Drain Health is, both in Oblivion and Morrowind, please see this video next. Thanks for watching.